Despite the turmoil the country has been through for the past decade, nightlife in Syria's capital city has remained as vibrant and active as it was when the country was still a narco state. Yes, you heard me right. And if you're familiar with the dealings of the Assad regime, then you already know how the family at the top profited from a state-run cartel so lucrative that it was apparently worth 3 times the trade of all Mexican cartels combined. And before you call cap, let me remind you that in Venezuela, the president's nephews, before they were caught, were able to traffic so successfully because they would come into the United States on diplomatic flights. And according to the U.S. State Department, in accordance with the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations, diplomatic pouches shall not be opened or detained, nor are they searched, meaning that the diplomat of a nation can pretty much fly into any country without having their bag searched. And since the Assad regime personally produced and sold Captagon, which is an amphetamine-type stimulant, they could arrange for it to land on foreign soil via a diplomatic flight or by shipment. However, when the roaming drug gangs of Syria try to sneak it over the border of a neighboring country, it doesn't always turn out so well, as one man, described as the Pablo Escobar of Syria, had one of his 3 houses completely flattened by a Jordanian airstrike that took out him and most of his family, while his associates all received texts from an unknown number, probably the Jordanian intelligence service, stating,
"We know who you are, your movements are monitored, your meetings are hacked. You are contributing to destroying the minds of our people, and for their sake, we will not have mercy on any of you."
Jesus Christ. But even with this difficulty, the drug still makes its way into the vibrant nightlife scene in Saudi Arabia, which had become its biggest market. So 2 things I want to figure out is how the family at the top, or the family formerly at the top, profited from this apparently statewide operation, and who the biggest agents are responsible for the day-to-day operation. Mariah Ramadani, the man I mentioned earlier as the Pablo Escobar of Syria, whose home was reduced to rubble by the Jordanian military, according to Jordanian intelligence, Bashar al-Assad, the former president, gave consent and even helped facilitate the disposal of al-Ramadani, despite the fact that he seemed to be very loyal to Assad at one point, as his family residence had the logo of the Syrian intelligence agency hung by the door, as well as a large photograph of Bashar al-Assad, which is odd considering that he was probably responsible for most of the money the al-Assad family made from this trade. Was this an attempt to distance the family from the controversy? This airstrike did come just under a year before the fall of Damascus and the end of the Assad regime, so maybe he was trying to get back on the good side of the Arab states. Anyway, about 2 years before the fall of Damascus, the AFP news agency interviewed Syrian smugglers, 30 former and at the time current law enforcement officers from Syria and other countries, as well as a fixer, a man near the top that helped facilitate multi-million-dollar deals. And according to this fixer, use of the drug in Saudi Arabia goes from the migrant workers all the way to the top of the wealthy elite of the kingdom, and is so cheaply produced that another fixer states that even if only 1 out of 10 shipments ends up getting through, everyone involved still profits. Now, the closest names to the regime I found in this operation were Basili Shukwat, Assad's nephew, who would allegedly host drug-fueled raves for the privileged partygoers at nightclubs while having regime loyalists moonlight as club bouncers to ensure safe consumption as well as distribution. And then, closer to the top, is Bashar al-Assad's younger brother, Major General Maher Hafizul Assad, one of the most, if not the most feared man in the regime. During his family's rule, he was the leader of the elite 4th Armored Division of the Syrian Army, and importantly, this division held control over certain border crossings. Now, according to the new regime that took over in Syria after the fall, Assad's younger brother used at least 1 military post as a production hub, likely more, and since the fall, several warehouses filled with the drug have been found, including a luxury villa which was housing a large production factory for the product. And according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights based in the UK, Assad's brother is one of the main beneficiaries of the trade, and it's actually how he pays the salary of his elite armor division. So here we have possibly the strongest link to the drug trade fueling the regime. A top military commander, who's also a member of the ruling family, profiting as well as paying the salary of what some consider to be the best trained and well-equipped division in the Syrian army. Now, in just 1 year, 46 million tablets were intercepted in Saudi Arabia, 2.9 million tablets were confiscated at the border crossing with Jordan, and in 2020, 14 tons of the drug were found in a shipment at the port of Salerno in Italy. Interestingly, it was reported that this shipment was manufactured by Assad's cousin, and it was also shipped off from a port under the control of Assad's brother. At its peak, the trade was earning anywhere from $30 to $60 billion in a year, making Syria by far the largest source of the drug in the world and turning the country into the world's largest narco state. And it's such a well-known fact There's even a list of people sanctioned by the US and UK for allegedly being involved in the drug trade, such as a cousin of the former president, he's his uncle's grandson, who according to the EU Council and several other organizations is involved in the production of Captagon, following a business model aimed at enriching the inner circle of the family's regime. There's 2 militia leaders that are involved in not only trafficking but assassinating rivals of the Assad family, and a high-level politician who's also a major business owner whose companies help facilitate production and smuggling. And we don't need to go over every man on this list to see that Syria clearly fits the definition of a narco state, as it appears that every level of government, from the armed forces, low-level politicians, all the way up to the ruling house, is in some way involved in the drug trade. Before the regime's fall, Syria was paying way more for imports than they were making from exports. But we have the US State Department estimating that Assad's wealth was around $1 billion at least, one of his uncles reportedly being worth over $5 billion, with the wealth of the rest of his family being hard to pin down. And it just makes you wonder where all this money came from. Now, it's hard to find out exactly when the family cartel started producing and exporting drugs, and it's somewhat unclear if Bashar was the one who started it or if it had been going on since the reign of his father. But according to the United Nations, some type of major drug production has been going on in Syria since at least 2006. With the Assad family already having been in power for 43 years at that point, so it's hard to think they didn't have a hand in it back then too. One thing that's certain is that the drug trade was key in funding the defense of the regime once the civil war broke out in 2011. After decades of autocracy and corruption, Syria was somewhat isolated and lacking allies to defend the Assad family, especially since the fall of the only other Ba'athist regime in the world, Iraq, in 2003. Of course, Russia was always an ally, but aside from some war crimes, they were unable to save the regime. China joined the conflict on the side of the Assad family, but in a minimal role, only providing training and humanitarian support, and with the US, UK, France, Turkey, and several armed groups all fighting in their own interests within the country, Assad had no hopes of winning this war, and likely only managed to enrich himself and his family before he called that emergency helicopter to take him to Moscow once his time was finished. Now, beginning immediately after the fall in 2024, the new regime in Syria vowed to destroy the Captagon production industry in the country, and with the main players all in hiding, the industry has crumbled and the flow of the drug has dropped by 90%. Although it may still be found in some places, it appears that Syria's time as a narco state ended with the fall of the Assad family. But the family has made more than enough to sustain themselves without having to ever set foot in Syria again. Now, this story was surprising to me. Although I've heard it mentioned before, I always knew that the penalty for this type of operation was much more severe in the Middle East. And honestly, I thought that it was just a product of the anarchy that happens when a country is left without a functioning government, as I first heard it mentioned in Lebanon. But boy, was I surprised to learn that it was in fact the functioning government responsible for the whole thing. And I guess that type of thing shouldn't really be surprising if you pay attention to the rest of the world. But as always, thank you for watching. And if you guys like my cartel series, just let me know and we'll keep going to every country. And of course, we will cover the United States.